Well, greetings and welcome to another VillageSoup interview. And today with us we have Vicki Doudera, and she is our state rep from Camden. And you're in the 129th Legislature, which has been a very busy legislature. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. Yep, I represent District 94, which is Camden, Islesboro, and Rockport. And I'm enjoying it. We're off to a great start, and the spirit is great in Augusta, and a lot of cooperation happening, and people anxious to work with the new governor. So, yeah, it's off and running.
All right. Well, the first thing I wanted to ask you about is something, I got to be honest with you, I'm somewhat baffled often in these articles about energy policy and regulation, but my basic understanding is you're on an energy committee in the legislature, and that there's been a lot of talk about unhappiness with both like the monopoly that CMP represents and some of the rates that they've charged. And now there's talk about creating some kind of a consumer-owned, power agency that would take over for that. Can you talk a little bit about where you stand on that? That's a pretty big issue.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yes, I'm serving on the Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee. Terrific. It's chaired by Senator Mark Lawrence and Representative Seth Berry. And Seth Berry is actually the one who has put in the bill to create a consumer-owned power main utility. It's not quite out yet, so we haven't got the language right in front of us, but I was present at a couple of the meetings prior to the big launch of it and the press conference. And the idea is simple. I mean, we already have consumer-owned utilities in Maine. Not everybody is served by CMP. There's also Emera. Not everybody's served by Emera. Some parts of Maine do very, very well, and they pay much less for their electricity, and they're happier, their customer satisfaction is much higher, and they have consumer-owned utilities. And the main thing with a consumer-owned utility is there's no investors making money off it. The money goes right back to the shareholder, to the stakeholders, to the ratepayers. So there's other states that have this. Nebraska has a consumer-owned utility. Long Island, New York has a consumer-owned utility. So it isn't something that is a strange or unheard of idea. We're already doing it in Maine in certain places, and it'd be great if we owned our power.
Right, and CMP actually does have investors that are outside the state that are getting like a share of what we're paying for rates. So our rates could potentially be lowered if we had a situation where we owned our utility.
Where you don't have investors. Exactly. Our rates would, all the other consumer-owned utilities, the rates are lower, much lower. People down east, and I can't remember the name of that consumer-owned utility, but they're paying less than those of us who are CMP customers are paying. So, I think, and let's face it, people are very unhappy with CMP, unhappy with the hijinks with the bills. It's still happening. So I don't feel like we could do any worse, really.
Right, and I think they've raised the issue of, this is like the government seizing kind of a private agency, but at the same time, this one is a regulated monopoly. So essentially that's a different situation, is my understanding?
Right, and they would be paid fairly. It would all be appraised, and we would have to pay a fair price for that utility and for Emera. So we'll see where it goes, but I think that this is the perfect time to do it. And certainly, there's a Facebook group with like 7,000 members who are disgruntled customers of CMP, and Emera is also owned by people outside the state, and it's for sale. So,
So people who support this effort actually should go to Facebook and go ahead and click on that to help show that support.
Yeah, they could take a look at that, and I will say that this is a bipartisan effort, this bill. When we've had the meetings, there have been former linemen
That word's
from CMP.
Not completely obsolete? That's a thing that still happens?
Yeah, I think that, as I said, the spirit's very good there, and people are anxious to work together. I think they were frustrated. A lot of people on both sides were frustrated the past 8 years. So people but getting back to the whole, main power, consumer-owned power, there are folks who are business owners who are Republicans who say, I want to pay less for my power. This would do it. There are former linemen and there are employees who work there right now who are in favor of it. So we'll see where it goes. It's very exciting.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then one of the other things that was interesting, we've been targeting kind of plastics because we're seeing the devastation in the environment that's kind of caused by plastic. And you have a bill that would either limit or try to eliminate single-use plastic bottles. Can you talk a little bit about that bill and how is it doing and is it going to happen?
Right. It actually was a bill, it's, I'm going to get you the exact number of it here, LD 102. And it was to create more recycled plastic content in the bottles and to connect the caps of beverage bottles. I don't know what you are told in Rockland here when you recycle bottles, but we were always told in Camden that to take the cap off. Those caps end up in our rivers and our streams, by our roadsides, and they also end up in the ocean. And they are really doing a number on marine mammals and on shorebirds because they float. And they think that they're food, and then they're ingesting the plastic, and then they can't grow. And so it's a real issue, not to mention that they're all over the place, in our environment. So this bill would provide that beverage manufacturers have to come up with a bottle where the cap was tethered to the bottle. And this was one of my first bills. I actually inherited it from another legislator who had tried it the past couple of years. He had wanted to turn some over to some of us, and I said, yeah, I'm on the Camden Conservation Commission. We've done a number of bills around plastics, just like you have here in Rockland. And so I took it on, and I've learned so much. And it's actually already gone to committee. I introduced it. We had the public hearing on it. Of course, the beverage companies are opposed to it because it would cost them money to redesign the bottles. And then they had the work session. And I think what's going to come out from it, and I'm hoping, something good comes out of it. And I think that what's going to happen is we're at least going to try to get an education campaign from the beverage companies so that people know. They say the cap is supposed to be attached when recycled. So at least if that is happening and that's on people's awareness, maybe that'll eliminate the caps going in the ocean, the caps going on the roadside, and then down the line we'll try this again. I think it's a little bit too soon for it right now. Maine is a small market for beverages, and when we get some more critical mass behind it, other states are also looking at this. So when we get some, maybe in 2 years, we'll have more critical mass behind it, and then we can actually pass it. But at least I want to get something good out of it, and I think that we will, hopefully get some more education around it.
And part of the requirement was basically, it was not just to get rid of the bottles, but it was that they would have to have a certain content that was actually recyclable.
Right.
Because we've been seeing that trend too, where, plastics, the plastic market for recyclables isn't what it used to be.
Right.
And so we've been seeing that at all of our transfer stations and our recycling centers.
Yeah, exactly. Right, and the beverage companies are actually already trying to do that. They're already kind of, increasing the recycled content, so that's good. But you raised the larger question, which is really troubling, is where is this plastic going? And I think
it seems to be going in the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, if we're shipping it to other countries who aren't necessarily able to use it either, but what are they doing with it? I think they are putting it in the ocean. I mean, that's what it seems to be, exactly. I think what, I've talked to the National Resources Council of Maine, and they helped me with this bill quite a bit. And one thing that we were talking about is, when do we start making the manufacturers accountable for all this plastic? And not just the beverage companies, but the laundry detergents, the shampoo bottles, all the things that are plastic. Why is it up to us, the consumers, to have to deal with it after we use it? Shouldn't they have some responsibility for, helping us get rid of it or, reducing it? So.
Plus you think about like the Amazon box that you get that comes with all that extra packaging so it can survive the trip from wherever it came from.
Right.
And there's tons and tons and tons of plastic. And it's been feel good to say I'm recycling it, but now with the bottom dropping out of the recycling market, is it really being recycled?
Are we just feeling good about something that's really maybe is, very dubious? I was on Islesboro on Saturday meeting with some constituents out there, and a gentleman said that he had recently been to Germany, and Germany has some really strong laws around plastic. And, for instance, when you buy toothpaste, it comes in a tube. You don't buy it in a tube and in a box. I mean, why do we need a tube and a box? So anyway, things like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that segues to Islesboro. My understanding, too, is that there's been an ongoing issue with increasing ferry rates, and that some people are very concerned about that. And you kind of inherited that. I believe Owen was working on that. So where are we at with that?
Right. Well, it did come up last spring, and what I did is I promised the folks in Islesboro that my very first bill would be addressing this, because it's a pretty serious situation for them. I mean, they really are a commuter island. They're only 15 minutes from Lincolnville, as we all know, And for them to be, have these rates which doubled for them, it's just really creating a hardship. Already, at least one family has moved off the island because they couldn't afford to live there. And I've been talking to young families, seniors, business folks. It kind of affects all of them. So where we're at with that is that that my bill is in, and Senator Herbig was the co-sponsor on that, who represents much of Waldo County. And we're waiting for the public hearing, which will probably be the end of March. And then we'll have the public hearing before the Transportation Committee. But in the meantime, I met with the new Transportation Commissioner, along with a couple of folks from Islesboro, and Commissioner Van Note, who's brand new on the job, one of Governor Mills' appointees. And he, I would say, is, he listened very, very carefully. He realizes that the situation was not handled well, that the ferry structure really isn't working because the ferry's now having to look at charging surcharges because they aren't making the money they thought they would make from this last round of tariffs. So he sees that the situation isn't working, and that in his words, it needs a do-over. So I'm hopeful that that do-over will happen soon, and maybe the change will come about prior to the bill. We'll see. As you know, Islesboro also has a lawsuit on the ferry regarding how it was all handled. So anyway, he said, and I think we all believe that he favors collaboration over confrontation. So that's hopefully we can collaborate, come back to the drawing table, and craft a tariff system that's fair and good for all the islands.
Yeah, I mean, that's been an ongoing issue with the, the Department of Transportation and whoever's running the ferry people, the state.
Right.
Sometimes it's like they'll hold a public hearing, but you feel like they're just checking that off their list of things to do. Do they actually listen? I mean, it would be so much more inexpensive than having a lawsuit that they have to litigate than to just maybe listen to people and maybe meet them halfway in some way.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, Dan, and I mean, I think that was part of the problem is the islanders did not feel like the Main State Ferry system was listening. And we made that point to Commissioner Van Note, and he said, yeah, that's not good. We need to be listening. He wants to beef up the Ferry Advisory Committee. So I think that there's, he's looking at it with fresh eyes, and I feel very optimistic that some good's going to come out of it. I just hope it comes out soon because I know they're really suffering on the island.
All right.
Yeah.
And the other one we've talked about in the paper, but we haven't really talked about in a video, is you've done some gun rights, or not gun rights, but gun safety measures. And one was basically a requirement that people, or at least an accountability for whether or not a person stores their guns safely, locks them up, and then if they are used in a crime of some kind, there could be consequences. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, definitely. Let me just find it right here so I can get you the number. Let's see. It's LD 379, in case anybody wants to look it up. And this kind of came about when I was knocking on doors this summer, and I had a number of moms tell me that they were very concerned about their kids and gun safety. And a couple of them said, I'm worried when my kids go to play at other people's houses that there may be guns that aren't safely secured. So I started looking into this, and I realized that in Maine, a state where we have an awful lot of guns, hunting, a big tradition, we own guns in our house, that even in houses where children are present, loaded firearms do not have to be safely secured. So we're talking about loaded guns right now. And I was kind of appalled. So there's nothing on the books that asks you, hey, you're a parent, you've got young children in the house, you've got a loaded gun, it needs to be secured. So, we know that guns in homes pose a clear threat to children. And New Hampshire has a bill like this. If they decide to play with them, Connecticut has a bill. Exactly. Yeah. There was a tragedy in August in Oakland where an 8-year-old little boy went up to his father's closet and killed himself with a loaded shotgun, unintentionally, accidentally. The year before, a 5-year-old girl from Belfast with her dad down in southern Maine, he's fiddling with the television. She gets up, she looks in his backpack, loaded handgun, kills herself. So, I mean, it would be nice. There's another bill that's also out there that Representative Ann Perry has put forward. Hers is about securing any firearms in homes. That's even better. But at least I'd like to see that loaded guns in homes with children are safely secured. So that's
And so
that's where
basically,
it's at.
if there's an incident in which a gun has gone off and it's hurt somebody, and then the question would be raised if this bill became law of whether or not that gun was properly secured, and if not, there could be consequences for the gun owner.
Right. Now, if there's a tragedy and such as the ones I've mentioned, we're not going to punish a parent further by saying, okay, now you're in trouble because you had it low. I mean, it's punishment enough that something happened to that child. But say a child takes a loaded gun to school. It happens. I was talking to a representative who sits behind me, and she said, she knows of a situation where a child got a hold of a loaded gun, and he and his friend went to target shoot and narrowly missed. They didn't realize that baseball was being played, on the other side of a, stand of bushes or something, and just narrowly missed hitting somebody. So situations like that, that's where they'd be responsible. But, I'm not saying the bill may not be perfect as it is right now. It is exactly the same bill they've got in New Hampshire. But what will happen is there'll be a public hearing. People will come and speak in favor of it, speak against it, speak not in favor or against it. And then the committee will take it and work on it.
So this is the current law in New Hampshire?
Yes. Okay. Current law in New Hampshire, and it's been on the books a long time, like more than a decade.
What kind of reaction are you getting? Because a lot of times when we write anything about gun issues, we get a very strong and often a very negative reaction to any attempt at gun regulation.
Yeah, good question. Thank you for asking that, because I've been, I should say, pleasantly surprised, because I don't think that people are viewing this as a gun bill or a gun rate bill. This is a bill to protect children. This is about keeping kids safe in their own homes or in others' homes. And my co-sponsor is a Republican senator who I happened to meet on the legislative bus tour and talk with him, and I sent it to him, and he said, I can support this. He said, because this is not about taking away anybody's guns. It's not about Second Amendment rights. It's about keeping children safe. So I think I'm finding that, and I've had a couple people email me about it, who have questions, and I've explained it to them, and we've had good dialogue about it. So, I hope that people will see that it's really to keep kids safe, and we have one fatality a year that is like the ones that we talked about. That's one too many, and we have who knows how many near misses. So I don't think it's too much to ask to say, if you've got kids in your home, you need to lock your gun up securely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any other priorities this session for you that I didn't think of to ask you about?
Sure. Well, I think my number one priority, and I want to thank you for helping me do it, is communication with my constituents. And I feel like that's something really important that I bring to the table as someone who has been in the communication industry and really values communication. I want to let people know what's going on in Augusta and how the process works, and what's happening, and I want to be approachable. So communication is one of my number one priorities. So thank you for helping me do it.
Okay.
Some of my other bills that are out there, we talked about some, but I'm helping residents in Rockport and Camden with a bill that I'm kind of calling the Riverwalk bill, but it is LD 892. And, oh, no, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. Let me get the right one. Actually, it still has an LR number because it isn't out yet, but it's LR 1114. And it's an act to amend the shoreline zoning laws to permit non-motorized walking trails. So you probably know in Camden that along the old tannery section along the Magonacook River, there's a trail, and there's a group, the Pathways Committee, who want to increase that, and they've run up against some spots where shoreline zoning might come into play. So this is just an effort to help them be able to do that, but it also will help a lot of other communities across the state who have maybe rails to trails paths that go along the shore or go along rivers or lakes. And I respect shoreline zoning and what it represents, and it's important to keep our buffers in place. But this would provide that if a place is already developed, like it's a lawn or a driveway or a parking lot or it's disturbed ground, that then you could go a little closer and allow people to enjoy, the river or the
Well, I think there'll be a lot of interest
in
that in the Mid-Coast, obviously.
Yeah, and I did meet with the Department of Environmental Protection just to make sure that they were okay with the bill. They suggested some changes. We're incorporating those changes into it. So I'm hoping that, because shoreline zoning is there for a reason, and I certainly don't want to say that we're going to all of a sudden, go against shoreline zoning. But this is in an area, if areas have already been disturbed, hey, go a little closer so that people can enjoy their beautiful Maine outdoors.
Right, and that's increasing health and exercise and all these good things that we want too,
exactly,
right? Yeah.
Exactly. And then, I'm also working, a constituent contacted me about some issues that they've had with home visitations from the Department of Human Services and Health and Human Services. And so I put a bill in for him that would require that when somebody came from DHHS, they would ask if you preferred that the session be videotaped. And I see it as an inexpensive way. It could even be, done on somebody's phone. But that would provide accountability and maybe help improve the trust between families and DHHS workers. That'll run into some questions too. What happens with the video? Well, we'll figure all that out. But I think it might go a long way to at least addressing this constituent's concerns, but maybe other people too who have had, situations where they felt like maybe what happened in their home wasn't represented fairly later on. So.
Yeah, it might be worth documenting those kinds of interactions because, I mean, there's pretty high stakes in those things.
Right, exactly. So those are some of the things I'm working on. And then I've, co-sponsored a number of things. Senator Miramont, an act to have the state meet the mandatory 55% contribution to schools. That's been something that is very important to people in our area. And,
Has that really got any chance of happening, though? I mean, that'd be quite an economic shift.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, we'll have to see. We know that Governor Mills already increased it slightly in her budget, not as high as we would like. So, we've got to see. All these things that do come down to where do you find the money and, where do you get the funding. But, and that's another thing bringing up Governor Mills' budget that we're going to be launching into very, very quickly. We've already been talking about her supplemental budget. My committee appeared with the Appropriations Committee and we discussed that. Broadband is something that we're really looking at funding heavily throughout the state. So, we're pretty lucky here.
Are you in favor of increasing broadband?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. I think if we really are going to improve our workforce here in Maine, get more younger people in Maine, get more people from other places to Maine, we've got to have good connectivity throughout the state. I see it all the time in my job as a real estate agent. The first question people will ask is, how is the broadband? How is, it's essential nowadays. And it's not only for businesses, but also for people, connecting to find their health records. Anytime you go to the doctor now, it's like, well, go on my chart or go on, my health. Or it's important for that. It's important for kids to be able to do their homework, to learn, to look up stuff. So it's, it really is sort of the electricity. We're still talking about electricity today, but it is the kind of the electricity, the same kind of thing, getting electricity out to rural areas. Now we've got to get broadband.
Yeah, it enables young professionals to work from home and those kinds of businesses.
Definitely.
So it just seems like if we build it, they might come,
Farmers,
that kind of thing, yeah.
You don't think about it, but farmers need access to the internet. If they're going to sell their products, if they're going to keep up with developments in agriculture. Everybody needs it nowadays. It's a necessity. Seniors, to keep them from being isolated. So, yeah.
Excellent.
I'm definitely in favor of that. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for watching. And be sure to check out all of our news videos and interviews on knox.villagesoup.com. If you go up to the tab that says Watch, you can scroll down to Behind the News, and you can find all kinds of interviews with local people that are doing important things. You have any thoughts, suggestions, questions, email us at news@villagesoup.com. Thanks.
And can I say get in touch with me too, because I'm happy to answer any questions for people, or if they want to come testify in Augusta, let me know. I'm happy to help. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Vicki.
Thanks.